Hello, everyone. Welcome to EMD Media. EMD Media works on understanding, measuring, and doing. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Today is the weekly H panel. The H panel starts now. Okay, great. Thank you again for showing up today. Yusuf Gabhewat, Professor Ezekiel Gabisa, and like last week, Faisal is missing today, and he would hopefully join us next week. We hoped last week as well that way. So let's start as usual with the what stood out for you during the past week. A lot has happened, including today. But in your perspective, that's great to hear. So, Professor Rizkia?
Of course, it's events week, filled week, including today, as you said. But what stood out for me today is the revelation that after the declaration of the state of emergency, that the crackdown has continued in Ethiopia. Journalists, as many journalists as 15, 16 journalists are held incommunicado, or some are brought to the courts. Members of the Tigran community and some members of the Oromo community for possible association or alleged association with the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oromo Liberation Army, two organizations that were designated as terrorists last May, have been rounded up and taken to unknown places, unknown locations that have continued and deepened in many parts. As many as 10,000 people are always rounded up from the streets, and this level of crackdown and violence against one's own citizens under the state of emergency that was declared for no other reason than rounding up people. It's amazing the level of impunity, the level of recklessness, the level of playing with human life in Ethiopia has descended to new low for me, because once you imprison people, you don't deny them visitation rights, you don't deny them food or drink or facilities, sanitation facilities, but all of this is happening in Ethiopia. So this is probably what prompted today's action on the international stage, with the level of violence, the willingness to commit all kinds of egregious acts against fellow human beings, has reached a new level. This is under the state of emergency. Concerning the war itself, the carpet bombing of Alamada, what purpose it's playing, I really don't know. But the carpet bombing of Alamada with fixed-wing aircrafts, the continued use of drones to target infrastructure in the northern part of Ethiopia and the western part of Ethiopia. This kind of violence is really unseen. And what political or economic goal is pursued for this, I cannot begin to fathom. But this has really confounded many and confounded myself. But one of the things that I am not I'm unable to make any sense of is some of the journalists that have been apprehended and some of them are held in locations that are not known, are actually supposed to be supporters of the government in many other occasions, except that they uttered words that were not seen as flattering to the prime minister. That one of them, for instance, used the word that Ethiopia is a country, not the prime minister's PLC. If you're going to be mapped and held incommunicado for lèse majesté, I don't know. I mean, Ethiopia has really gone to the emperor's days. That's when I thought that there was a crime of lèse majesté in Ethiopia, but that was emblematic of the level of the level of egregious violations of human rights that we have descended to. So that's what really stands out for me.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Yes, much of what I noted last week also overlaps with what Professor Hiskiel has been saying. In fact, we can say that what's happening now, right now in Ethiopia, is a genocidal regime that has gone fully paranoid. There is fear behind what it is doing. But there were, to go back though, there were three main points. One of them was after last Friday, there was another miracle that was pulled off by the TDF on the Gashena front. That was a big event, I believe. If you remember, I mentioned at that time that sensitive area, that sensitive triangle with the points of Gargara, Falakit, and Debre Zabit. It seems the latest news that I have heard was that they are now past Debre Zabit and nearing Chochoho, which means that if they could keep that area, this time around they will have a greater buffer zone between Gashena and the Ethiopian troops or Ethiopian and Amhara troops. Another one is, of course, how the Abiy government has gone fully genocidal. We have seen what's going on in Western Tigray. They are doing it openly. For example, they have been evicting old people, women, but detaining all the male, all the young and male. They have been detaining, and many of them have also been killed. But they don't. This time around, what's amazing is that they don't seem to care whether the world knows about it or not, because those people that have been evicted are now telling the world exactly what has been going on. You have seen the Human Rights Watch report, and that's about Western Tigray. Another one is, of course, what Professor Hiskiel has been describing in Addis Ababa and other parts of Ethiopia, where tens of thousands are now being interned in concentration camps. That's also being done openly. And the third one is the carpet bombing of Alamata and others. To me, these are, one is, of course, a paranoid nation gone amok. That's one. But the second part, it seems to me, they are testing the waters. They are testing the world. How patient will the world be? It seems that they have been ratcheting up the various ways that they are conducting genocide right now. They have been ratcheting up slowly. And so far there had been no response to this genocidal whatever we might call it, plan or undertaking. Now the third point comes, the UN resolution. Hopefully this one will be taken as a warning from the world, and at least my hope is, but nevertheless, you can't hope that much from a paranoid regime. My hope is that they will curtail whatever that they are doing, given the world's reaction right now. Another thing that has been surprising about the UN resolution was, of course, not exactly surprising, the abstention and the voting of no by African nations. Uh, but one that surprised me was the case of Sudan. Sudan surprisingly voted, abstained from voting. That tells us a lot because the idea that somehow if the Tigrayan forces reach the Sudanese border, the Sudanese will help the Tigrayans. That is being put into question. Well, I mean, not necessarily, but it gives us a different picture of Sudan than we have imagined it means. Another thing that I have observed in the UN resolution was that all the leftist countries have voted for Ethiopia. Probably that no more Pan-Africanist movement have helped them. In that Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Namibia, all of those, all those nations that have leftist leanings or have had a history of liberation movements like Namibia, they voted no for Ethiopia. It means that was what I noted last week.
Great. Maybe before we move to our topic of the day, Abiy Ahmed's peace and war narrative, I want also Professor Scale to comment on this. What happened today? There was a lot of campaigns in terms of going to African countries by the president of the republic, and other ways of campaigning. But as we see here, Senegal, Sudan, like Joseph mentioned, Togo, Libya, Malawi, Mauritania. These are the African countries that abstained. And we covered the Pan-Africanism, all effort of campaigning, presenting it as if this is our African war and so on. So, do you like to speak to that subject matter, Professor Scale? You are muted.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that. I think the significance of the voting pattern in for the resolution, which is to establish an international commission of human rights of experts on Ethiopia. That in itself is a topic to talk about. But the voting is number one. I was surprised that six or how many African countries actually abstained. I think Libya, Malawi, Senegal, Sudan, Togo abstained.
Mauritania, yeah.
And Mauritania, yes. Now, abstention, if all of these countries, these six countries, did not want the establishment of this international commission of experts, commission of human rights experts on Ethiopia, if they did not want, they could have voted no.
Yeah.
They could have simply voted no. Abstention in this case simply means the motion or the resolution could go forward. We don't want to cast a vote for it for diplomatic or political reasons or whatever that is, but they're not standing in the way. That is significant. It's because when you abstain, you're allowing the motion to go forward because six of these African countries voting no would have meant that the resolution wouldn't have been adopted. So abstention, six countries from Ethiopia, I thought was in fact encouraging because the countries that voted from Africa or other places, the surprise for me is like Bolivia, which is the official name of Bolivia is the plurinational state of Bolivia, which in many ways looks like Ethiopia as a multinational federation of nations and nationalities. It's fairly democratic, of course, left-leaning at this point in time. That they voted no was surprising for me. Other than that, Gabon or Eritrea, Cameroon, Paul Biya's Cameroon, the Philippines, the Russian Federation, Somalia, Venezuela, not surprising. These are the world's remaining modern-day dictators. That absolutely is not surprising. But the fact that it passed actually signals something as far as I am concerned, but that's not what you asked me to speak to. But I thought it was a significant development that it passed and has beyond the establishment of this international commission with its mandate as an independent commission of experts, beyond the significance of continuing to investigate. What that means for the earlier attempt at a joint or a hybrid investigation, what that means for that, and what this would mean going forward, what the political message is. It's significant, but for now, I would just say that the voting actually from the African countries, that 6 of them actually abstained and allowed this resolution to pass and the commission to be established was actually significant. That it was encouraging.
Great. I think given the weight of the subject matter, and if there is nothing coming up that would deter us, to consider or reconsider, I think we will cover that maybe next week. Given the input from the Ethiopian side, including the Human Rights Commissioner, Daniel Bakala, what he wrote today's in terms of just taking only the joint investigation he did at the final and go for the implementation. That's, I think, a significant matter to discuss. The topic today, Abiy Ahmed's peace and war narrative. Before that, when Yosef mentioned about the Ethiopian government doesn't seem to care about whether they do it in open, whatever, and so on, Abiy actually gave this interview just before the election. He was giving an idea on how he gets inspiration from, looks like, from soccer game. So let's, if it works, let me just play that, and that will give us some idea on the thinking behind.
ሰሞኑን ካለው የኳስ ጨዋታ አንጻር እንኳን ወስደን ብንመለከት ሁለት የሚቃረኑ ግሩፖች በአንድ ሜዳ ውስጥ ኳስ ይጫወታሉ። በዚህኛው ግሩፕ ያለ በኤ ግሩፕ ውስጥ ያለ አንድ አጥቂ ሰው ኳሱን ይዞ ለማጥቃት ቢንደረደር ከሚቃረነው ኃይል ሊገጥሙት የሚችሉት ጉዳዮች ከሞላ ጎደል ይታወቃሉ። አንደኛው በብቃት በልጦ በችሎታ በልጦ ኳሱ መቀማት ነው። ምንም ህግ ሳይጣስ በተሻለ ብቃት ኳሱን ቀምቶ በወገን ኃይል ላይ ግብ እንዳያስገባ ማድረግ ነው። በብቃት የማትበልጠው ሰው አስቸጋሪ ሰው ከሆነ ሰውየው የሚያጠቃው ግለሰብ ዳኛ ሳያይ ራስህን ደብቀህ ጎንትለህ ጎትተህ ጠልፈህ ኳሷ እንድትቀር እንድትጨናገፍ ማድረግ ነው። በችሎታም ካልበለጥክ ዳኛን ደብቀህም ማስቀረት ካልቻልክ ሶስተኛው ነገር ዳኛ እያየም ቢሆን ፋውል መስራት ነው። ዘለህ እግር ውስጥ መግባት ነው፣ ፋውል መስራት ነው።
So he's essentially saying, actually he spoke about this in relation to the war. So he's essentially saying, it's okay, if you cannot win whatever you are engaged in, you can go for the illegal one. So to the topic, the New York Times published an investigative report, and I'm sure you both read that. So is it something new or new information there, or in terms of methodology, anything that you can share in terms of what you knew before and what the New York Times report came up with? Yosef.
Well, of course, they say they have some sources from inside the government, and therefore there are new merajas or new evidence that they claim to have. So that is an additional thing. But overall, what I found this is people have been talking about this for a while, and as I have mentioned to you before. I did write an article on, I remember it was almost a year ago. It was in January 2021, just about 2 months after the war. And it had a similar title, the New York title, the New York peace title, it says the Nobel Peace Prize that paved the way for the war. And mine, it was in Ethiopia Insight. It says the peace that delivered total war on Tigray. And there were a number of things that I mentioned over there. It was, for example, the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize gave a perfect cover for the war preparations that the Abiy government and Isaias were conducting. That the first task of Abiy after his Nobel Peace Prize was how to rehabilitate Isaias. That was his first task, and he did that successfully. And that was because, of course, of the Nobel Peace Prize again. And when he rehabilitated Isaias in the neighborhood, he also succeeded in convincing the UN to lift the arms embargo that was imposed on Eritrea, which now, in retrospect, we could see that it was one of the main things that they needed for the preparation of war, because Eritrea, for about 3 or 5 years, it was prevented from arms purchase. And then, if you remember, at that time, I think it was in 2018, they did some kind of theatrics, both Abiy and Isaias. What they did was they opened the border with Tigray for a few months in order to show the world that they really meant peace this time, And once the arms embargo was lifted, Isaias immediately closed the border with the full approval of Abiy. Now, and further again, I mentioned about how the pandemic was used, because what we are looking at is when did it start the preparation of war? That's the whole point of the New York Times. And if you go back in Eritrea, I remember, I have it over here with me, it was how Eritrea used the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, as a cover, because it had, the smallest number of COVID cases, but it had the most draconian type of measures that it took, to prevent the people from moving anywhere in Eritrea, and it used that cover to prepare for the war. Let me hold on for a second. Oh, shit.
One thing that is interesting I saw is December 15, he had the title he used was what Yosef mentioned, this one, the Nobel Peace Prize that paved the way for war. And on the East Coast version, I think late edition, they used a different one. Just, for me, it makes a lot of sense in terms of making it clear. Plotting for war in Africa with Nobel Peace Prize as conflate. So you can go ahead, Yosef.
Yeah. Okay. Let me quote the big. What I wrote about that was the biggest clue that the two leaders were preparing for the war long before the triggering event that Abiy mentions, which is the attack on the Northern Command, or that Debretsion Gebre Mikael mentions the elections, is how Eritrea used the COVID-19 pandemic to cover its final preparations for the war. That was the first one. And then I added on that one, Mesfin Hagos, the one on the top next to Isaias was Mesfin Hagos before he escaped Eritrea. He said
he was the Minister of Defense as well, right?
Yes. He said Mesfin Hagos, the former Defense Minister of Eritrea, provides us with an additional piece of information in this regard, that specially trained Ethiopian troops were being stealthily stationed incrementally in a totally secluded area in Eritrea known as Gargara, not to be confused with the Gargara of Ethiopia, long before the elections were conducted and the Northern Command was neutered. Okay, so you have that story. Anyway, I mentioned about 6 or 7 of them to show that the preparations for war has been undergoing from the very beginning after the Jeddah Accord, when they made that alliance of dictators. Now, there are 2 things that bothered me. There are 2 riddles that come with this. The first one is neither the Abiy government, I felt that neither the Abiy government nor the TPLF was telling the whole truth, because the TPLF set the date on the elections as the triggering point. But the elections were too close to the war. You know, it was about 2 months in between. But the Ethiopian government, of course, for obvious reasons, it was mentioning that the triggering point was the attack on the Northern Command. Now, there were 2 riddles about that. Why did the TPLF, emphasize that the triggering point was the elections, even though the preparations have been going on for a long time before that? I have no idea, but my suspicion is that it was because at that time, the TPLF were being accused, especially by the opposition groups, that it was not, it didn't prepare enough for the war. So if it buys the narrative that the war preparations has been undergoing for about 2 or 3 years, then it will be accused of how come then that you didn't prepare enough for that one. But if the narrative is only on the elections, then it would be easier. There is no way you could prepare yourself, in 2 months. That's my suspicion, and I'm not exactly sure which ones of them both this narrative or not. But on the Ethiopian side, also there is another riddle that goes with it. On the Ethiopian side was, how come if this is the case, how was it possible that they haven't undertaken the war prior to? It seems to be a late date, especially given that the Trump administration was somehow friendly to the Abiy government. Could they have done it earlier? What prevented them from undertaking the war earlier than what they have done in November 2020? My suspicion again is that Eritrea was already ready for the war. Because it's always in a state of war. The only thing that it needed was for the arms embargo to be lifted, and it was done. That was done in 2018. Therefore, Eritrea was ready for the war. The Amhara Khalil was also ready for the war, probably a little bit later than Eritrea. But Eritrea was, as the New York Times said, was training tens of thousands of Amhara forces, and therefore, with the blockade that they have been conducting against Tigray for about 3 years, they were ready for the war. They were waiting for whom? They were waiting for the Abiy government to catch up. And the reason why the Abiy government didn't catch up quickly was because it had to consolidate its power first throughout Ethiopia. It did that in December 2019. Half of the consolidation was done when it created the Prosperity Party. And the next one happened after the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa. That to me was a pivotal time. I believe that was the authoritarian turn of Abiy government, openly, because it used that pretext to go totally authoritarian, which means after that it was ready for war. You remember the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa took place on June 2020,
Yeah.
2020, and the war happened a few months after that, in November 2020.
Yeah.
So I think those riddles I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that was the two reasons why those things happened.
I think you're mentioning of Hachalu. Maybe what happened after Hachalu was also a massive arrest in
Yeah,
Oromia,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
including Jawar and so on. So Oromia was
Well,
virtually under uh, command
yeah,
post. If you will.
yeah.
Um, Again, you can take us back to what was happening in Oromia as well, or whatever we knew at that time, and compare it with what this new information that's based on current and former officials. He talked to I think, who are still in Ethiopia, some of them outside. But he made it like connections to what was said, what was done. Actually, he mentions that what Abiy and his supporters took as a phase of article or article of phase was something that I think was hit hard by this report, in my view. Professor.
I don't want to take anything from Declan Walsh. He's a good reporter. He has a careful writer, and he writes in clear English so that it is accessible to readers. I don't want to take anything from what he had written on the fact that the Nobel Prize actually paved the way for war. Um, the other thing is the impact that it may have on policymakers in the West. I don't think that the United States government or our Western governments did not know before this article that the alleged attack on the Northern Command was simply a pretext for a pre-planned war. But this time that it is in the New York Times, it may have an impact to question the motivation for the war on Tigray, which now has descended into a genocidal war. They might begin to look away from the law enforcement operation. It may have that impact. I'm not suggesting that it will certainly have an impact on policymakers, but it's the New York Times. Now it's the New York Times that is actually blowing the cover, the cover that Abiy and his government at the beginning of the war actually used to justify their actions in Tigray. Now that we have gone much far away from law enforcement operation, I don't think it matters what the origins of the war is, because whether the attack on the Northern Command was the beginning of the war or what triggered the war or anything else, it doesn't matter. The war is now a genocidal war. So no pretext, nothing that the Tigray government had done justifies the actions that the Eritrean military, the Ethiopian military, the Amhara military had taken for the last year or 13 months and are still doing. Nothing justifies it. The third thing is that definitely Abiy may have construed the award that was bestowed on him as a license to kill. He has the capacity to do that. He has the capacity to take what was given to him as an encouragement to encourage him not only to seek peace with Eritrea, but also to continue with the reform efforts in Ethiopia, which is what the Nobel Committee was hoping at that time, in the same way that they awarded Barack Obama at the beginning of his presidency to encourage him to de-escalate and end the war in the Middle East. So, in that respect, that Abiy Ahmed may have construed that goodwill gesture as a license, as a cover for what he wants to do. So, he did not understand that. He probably did not understand that becoming a Nobel laureate actually increases the scrutiny on whatever action that he's doing, because now you are a global figure as a Nobel laureate, that the scrutiny increases. So that cannot be taken as a license. So he probably miscalculated at the time and went to war. But Having said that, I don't think that there is any secret about uh, Abiy's plan and Isaias's encouragement to, in their view, to reorganize and restructure the Horn of Africa from day one they met. That Tigray was the target of war. What surprises me here is that for a year or so, we've been talking about this since September, actually since March of 2019, I think, we've been talking about what the plan of the Prosperity Party was. And close to the war in October and in September, we knew that there was a blanket order that was given to all 14 divisions of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. It's not only the orders, we have seen them. We've seen the 25th Division from Ogaden in Shilabo, the 21st Mechanized Division from Ogaden, the 32nd from Adama, proceeded from all of these areas through Dese, through Waldia, and were on the borders of settled on the borders between Amhara and Tigray, the Tigray region. We know that. We've seen that. We've seen that. They were there long before the pretext of the Northern Command. And I keep this in mind that I actually named all the divisions that had settled in that area. And the divisions from Western Ethiopia, from Wallagga, the 12th, the 24th, the 22nd, they were partially airlifted. Others were transported through Gondar to the Western Front. 3 divisions were there. We know that. And some divisions from the south, the division from Awasa, and a brigade of a mechanized brigade of a commando unit from the Southern Command was also arrived in Sakota. They were in that area. We know that 42 divisions of Eritrea were arrayed from the east to the west borders of Tigray and Eritrea. All of this were there a long time before the war started. But even before the preparations for war, even before the preparations with war, there were provocative measures that were taken by the Abiy government. Some at the discursive level, calling the Tigrayans all kinds of names, attaching epithets and labels to Tigrayans in general. That was going on for a long time to try to provoke them. We know that Antonov about 40 commandos landed in Mekelle to assassinate the Tigrayan leadership. We know that. So I don't think there is any particular point where Abiy actually decided, I will go to war with Tigray. I think he was intent on doing so from the very beginning. And if I went into why I say this, it would take time, but the plan to attack Tigray and obliterate the leadership, if not the entire Tigray region, on the part of Abiy, has always been his plan since he came to power. Maybe he has this grudges from the very start that he had against the TPLF. But for Eritrea, who became his comrade in arms against Tigray, the plan to obliterate not TPLF this time, not TPLF, but Tigray itself has always been there for him. These two came together and they unleashed their fury against the people of Tigray in the name of going against the TPLF. But I don't know if there was any particular point at which they decided to go and attack Tigray. For Abiy, it's always been a number one priority, and it's been a number one priority for Isaias for 27 years.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Talking about, when they decided, I was hoping as well for a date and so on. But we know, for example, as early as July 2018, actually to be specific, July 11th, 2018, at Sawa, Isaias was talking, I think it was in a seminar, where he mentioned the political cleansing And he was mentioning, saying, already the preparations done. Abiy is doing great job, in that preparation, and so on. So that we can trace. And there was, I think, a European in Belgium, I guess, a professor who was looking at this Eritrean involvement and how far it can go and so on. So on what I'm showing here, this is from the New York Times article. This was for me actually surprising, given that the number of meetings that happened officially at the same time, one-to-one, with no aid, with no one advisor in the meeting, and sometimes even flying to Addis unannounced, with no one knowing about that and so on. So given this is the case, and given that Abiy, always change narratives, but there is a significant elite that always buys that narrative. Will this what we are learning now, and for you guys and for others who knew it already before, will this change? Because you spoke about this might change what will happen, given it's New York Times, maybe in influencing Washington and the capital and so on. Will it influence the Ethiopian, base in terms of uh, what could come in terms of peace talks, in terms of the next steps, and so on? So, do you see this changing, or is this just another, again, war against the West, maybe against New York Times starting soon? Yosef.
Okay. Okay. I don't see it changing anything on the Ethiopian side. Probably it will get more paranoid than what it has been before, precisely because it's now with the with a new resolution passed at the UN, and with this New York Times, things may be closing in, and it will get more paranoid than it has been before. Uh, Besides that, though, to me, even if you look at the 14 times of numbers that Isaias has been going on to Ethiopia, it seems to me that the day they met, the day they first met, the question is, how far could we push it back? This intention of encircling Tigray and destroying it, how far could we push it back? To me, the Jeddah Accord, the Jeddah Accord itself, from the very beginning, this intention has been there. And it's not even a mystery, For example, we talk about. He also mentions at the New York Times, when people at Gondar, when he went to Gondar, the people shouting "Isaias, Isaias, Isaias." Remember, the same thing happened when Isaias first went to Addis Ababa at the Millennium Hall. Isu, 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 Isu was the question. So it was out there. There was no mystery about it. What did they see? What did the people of Gondar see in Isaias? What did the Addis Ababa elite see in Isaias when they called him Isu, Isu, Isu? It's not for peace reasons, the declared what they have declared so far at that time between Isaias and Abiy was peace. So it was not the peace that appealed to the Ethiopian people. If you look, for example, at the audiences in Asmara and Tigray at that time, you could see in the faces of the people there was genuine hope for peace. That was totally absent on the Ethiopian side, be it in Gondar or in Addis Ababa. They knew exactly why Isaias was. What would happen when with the confluence of Isaias and the Abiy, and that's exactly what happened. So from the very beginning, people knew. On the side of the Ethiopian elite, knew exactly what this was leading. So it was there was no mystery in it. That's my take from that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, talking about that, Abraha Kassa, as we remember, is one of the, I think, three maybe personalities of the Eritrean security apparatus, and maybe I think 4 organizations that were sanctioned by the US. And this is, again, New York Times mentioning Abraha Kassa going to Bahar Dar, I guess, or to Amhara region, where he met security leaders there, and agreeing to train 60,000 troops of the Amhara Special Forces. Maybe, Professor Scale, I want to just give you the final word, but in terms of the peace, there is always, together with the North Command narrative, there is always the narrative that Abiy did everything to solve his differences with Maqala through peaceful talks. And everyone is talking about that, every social media and mainstream media. And this is, for example, the former Minister of Peace, Mufriat, in recently.
ያኔም አለ 12 ምሽት 12 ሰዓት ገደማ ያልጠየቀ አወያዩኝ ያላለ ልወያይ ያላለ አካል ሚዜ ያስፈልገናል የሚል ጥያቄ ቀረበ። ግልጽ ለማድረግ ኦነግ ይሳተፍልን ብለው ጠየቁ። ኦነግ ካልተሳተፈ ውይይቱን አንቀጥልም። ይሄ ከ2 ዓመት በፊት ነው። ግልጽ ነው ማለት ነው። ያልተቀደሰው ጋብቻ ያኔም አለ። ሪሰንትሊ የሆነው ይፋ ነው ያደረጉት።
She was speaking to how the government, Abiy, was trying through all, avenues to solve it peacefully, but it didn't work. Among others, she mentioned how the TDF or TPLF asked the involvement of OLF in the negotiation. But to her point, there was a number of letters that were written by the government of Tigray. And among other things, they always emphasize the fact that it should be a national dialogue. It should be, actually they had what's called the federalist forces, and they were, pushing for that kind of dialogue. But the narrative, the dominant, if not the only narrative we have in Ethiopia is TPLF never ever wanted to solve it peacefully, and that's why they won. So if you want to speak to that, and then I'll give you also the final word moment.
Sure. One thing that I want to say before even speaking to the idea of that the Ethiopian government actually tried to negotiate and arrive at a political settlement, that might be the case, but what Joseph kept back, the word that he used so many times is really instructive when we talk about Abiy and his policies and his actions. Not only his policies, but his actions on the Ethiopian political scene. Paranoid. When we talk about paranoid, we probably take it lightly. I don't think Abiy could be subjected to a framework of understanding because he's a paranoid man. So for me, a paranoid leader, a person in a position of power, of course, one could say that it's only the paranoid that actually seek power in the first place. That aside, is a paranoid man is someone who kills people whom he considers a threat to his leadership. What's important here is that it's not that the persons that the leader considers a threat are actually a threat to him. It is that this is born in his mind and he believes it, so he acts on it to eliminate them. So for Abiy, the war against Tigray, on one level, it actually emanates from that paranoia that he knows them well. They know him well. Some of the generals were his bosses, and at different points, um, some of his bosses had actually um, uh, intimated that he is not a stable man. He knows this, so he acts from that paranoid conviction. So it's very difficult to analyze his actions, because that is the framework in which I want to understand Abiy. That word that Yosef used a number of times is quite instructive. It's not a joke. It's not simply an seeking an analogy, but it is that Abiy will always cut anyone. Forget about people he considers a threat to him. He cannot live under the shadow of his own friends who might look to be bigger than him. He can't. So to try to eliminate the TPLF, people he knew were his friends and his bosses, it's always there in him. That's the way he thinks. So that is important to kind of evaluate in the framework of this man is not really a rational man that could be subjected to a rational analysis. He acts out of fear, not out of calculations, political calculations. On the issue that she was saying that we tried Tigray, two things. One is the infantile way that he was approaching politics, that Abiy was approaching politics. He was sending people like religious leaders, people from Tigray, businessmen who were in Addis at the time, but of Tigray extract, secret negotiators, private conversations with his former friends in the TPLF. There wasn't an approach on the part of Abiy to try to resolve political differences through political negotiations. He was elders. This is not about elders. This is about politics, right? It is about political negotiations. It's not about personal issues that constitute the difference between Addis Ababa and Mekelle. These were fundamental issues that created a chasm, a difference between the regional state of Tigray at the time and the federal government under Abiy. And those were the constitution, the multinational federation, and governance in general, democratization and governance. On the issue of the constitution, Tigray, maybe the TPLF, when they were in power, for other reasons that we might talk about, did not implement the rights that are enumerated in the constitution fully. But then now they are insisting that we can't run away from it. So their approach was principled, that our conversation to resolve our differences must be based within the framework of the constitution. And that's what you're showing us here. And when they were talking about the multinational federation, it's the principle that Tigray and other regions must be self-governing, co-sovereign units. So if there is any discussion about political differences to avert war, if there is to be any conversation, it has to be between these two forces. The forces that actually support the vision of a federal Ethiopia and a democratized Ethiopia, then it should be all federal forces that should be represented. It's principles based. The other is about democratization, that elections should not be postponed, that only elected officials must govern. All right, when the TPLF was in power, they didn't do that, but now they are. They are insisting that the constitution of Tigray, and not even the constitution of Ethiopia, because the elections that they were planning to hold, was about governing Tigray. It was not about elections that delegates from Tigray that were going to sit in Ethiopian parliament. It's about Tigray being able to govern itself, and that applies to other regions. That's the principle. So the issue was about the constitution. Let the constitution be the framework for discussion. The multinational federation, let the constitutional arrangement of exercising power be the issue, because that's where the difference is. And that difference is not between Tigray, Mekelle, and Addis Ababa alone. It should be everywhere. The whole struggle that ended the EPRDF rule and brought Abiy to power was about these three things. Let's negotiate on that, is what the Tigrayan side were saying. But Abiy's approach was so ad hoc that there was no principle to it, there is no political logic to it, that it could not have continued. So when the former Minister of Peace was talking about they wanted a bridesmaid or something like that, it's just out of nowhere that he's bringing that to say that other members of the federation who are also insisting on the full implementation of the federal system should be at the table. Why is that a political no-go? It is actually a principled thing. So the difference is she has this temerity, the audacity to come on television and say that this was a wrong thing to do. It was actually the right thing to do, because the issue that brought Abiy to power was that the constitutional rights of Ethiopians were not respected. The multinational federation was not empowered, and that democratization did not go forward with elections. That is what brought about the change, and the change should be on discussion about differences should be on the table. It's all about the reform. It's all about the change. That's the difference. That's what he refused. That's why he went to war.
Interesting. About the infantile approach for everything, what always comes to mind is, I think it's back in March, he was talking about ducat, the flower in air. But what's interesting is after he said that, even if the parliament is to approve the coming back of TPLF or TDF, for negotiation, he was saying that I don't think the region would have, the courage to come as a president and, to face TV or something. So let me play that, because this is exactly what you are mentioning. His approach is so
አሁን ለትግራይ ህዝብ ለትግራይ ወዳጆች ለተከበረው ምክር ቤት መግለጽ መፈልገው ቲፒኤልኤፍ ማለት በንፋስ ላይ እንደተበተነ ዱቄት ማለት ነው። ከእንግዲህ በኋላ ሰብስበን ዱቄት ልናደርገው አንችልም። እሱን ትተን አዲስ ኃይል አዲስ የተማረ አሁን ያለውን ዘመን የሚዋጅ አስተሳሰብ መምራት የሚችሉ ሰዎች መፍጠር ይቻላል። ትግራይ ውስጥ በጣም ብዙ ሰዎች አሉ፣ ብዙ ምሁራን አሉ፣ ብዙ ሰዎች አሉ። አብረን መላላጥ መጋጋጥ ጠቀሜታ የለውም እንበልና የተከበረው ምክር ቤት ፈቅዶ መንግስትንም እረፍ ብላችሁ እዚያ የተሸሸጉ አንዳንድ ሰዎች መጥተው መንግስት ይሁኑ ቢባል እና መቀሌ ቢመለሱ በምን አይናቸው ነው ሚዲያ ላይ ቀርበው እንደ ትናንትና መናገር የሚችሉት? መልካቸው ስለተበላሸ ብቻ አይደለም፣ ሞራልስ ደቋል እኮ ቤት በኩል። ማንስ ነው የሚሰማቸው? ማን ነው የሚያምናቸው? ካሁን በኋላ ፕሬዝዳንት እንዴት ይኮናል? አይኮንም። ኢትስ ጎን። ይሄ ታሪክ ነው። በፍጹም ብንዋጋ ባንዋጋ አይደገምም። እኔ የሚያስታውሰኝ 83 84 አካባቢ ወደ ምዕራብ ስለነበርኩኝ የሆነ ወሬ ነበር ሁሉ ጊዜ ኮሎኔል መንግስቱ ስፔሻል ስፓርታና ኤርቦርን ወታደር ይዘው ጋምቤላ ገቡ ይባላል። በቃ ሰራዊት ውስጥ ወሬ ብቻ ነው። መጡ፣ ደረሱ፣ ጋምቤላ ገቡ ይባላል። እሳቸው የሉም። እንደዚህ አይነት ፕሮፓጋንዳ ለኢትዮጵያም ለትግራይም አይጠቅምም። የሚያስፈልገው አሁን ጠንካራ ኃይል አውጥቶ ክልሉን አረጋግቶ ወደ ሰላም መውሰድ ነው። ምክንያቱም ህዝባችን እየተጎዳ ስለሆነ።
Yeah, now I think it speaks to what you were mentioning, Professor Esquer. Maybe before we go to the final word as well. I think connection breaking. I'm back now. One thing that, in terms of being paranoid, but when he started, I think at least for the first year, what he was saying was even about his relationship and how the reform went on was something positive. This is a very short clip before we go to the final word.
ነገር እርግፍ አድርጎ መተዋቸውን መዘንጋት ተገቢ አይደለም። ያ
So this is 1 year after he came to power.
ይገኛል። ለምሳሌ የዛሬ ዓመት ገደማ ለቀናት እጅግ አታካች ውይይት፣ ክርክር፣ ንግግር በምናደርግበት ሰዓት ሀሳቡን የማይቀበሉ ሰዎች የዲሞክራሲ እርሾ በውስጣቸው ባይኖር ኖሮ የትኛውንም ሀሳብ በማፈን ነገሩን ማስቀጠል የሚያስችል ጉልበት ነበራቸው። ነገር ግን አሁን የምናጣላቸውም ቢሆኑ ለሀሳብ ልዕልና ተገዝተው በብዕርና በንግግር ብቻ ብዙዎች መሳሪያ የታጠቀ ወታደር ማዘዝ የሚችሉ ሰዎች ጭምር በብዕር ታዘው ለዲሞክራሲና ለኢትዮጵያ መቀጠል ሁሉም ነገር እርግፍ አድርጎ መተዋቸውን መዘንጋት ተገቢ አይደለም። ያ
So this is what he said 1 year after the reform. Yosef, your final word for today.
Okay, since we have been talking about Abiy and his language, I think there are two things that we need to mention, that I need to mention. One is probably, when you think about inflation, in history, for example, in Zimbabwe, a runaway inflation where the inflationary pressure happens almost every day. To some extent, the Amharic language itself, the way it has been abused, it's as if the language itself has this. There is a runaway inflation in the language itself, so that words don't fetch the kind of meaning they used to have before. So it becomes an easy target for abuse, for abuse. There is a friend of mine who keeps telling me Amharic has become an anti-language. An anti-language, by anti-language, he means that it has, at this point in time, that it's very hard to use the language, a language as it corresponds with reality, That's what I see again and again when Abiy talks in these videos that they have been presenting us. The other thing that I see is probably, which has been a puzzle to many foreigners, is the Habesha face itself. The Habesha face is a non-threatening face. If you look at it, for example, Abiy, when they see Abiy with his smile, with his humbleness, in quotation mark, humbleness, they see a face that is not as threatening as, for example, as that of Idi Amin. It's not, or as some other revolutionaries, with that angry face. Instead, they see this amicable face in front of them. Even though, for example, the Nobel Prize, when the Nobel, we are blaming the Nobel Prize for giving him, the Nobel Committee for giving him the Nobel Prize, precisely because they haven't done the proper vetting of Abiy. Had they done that, at that point in time, it was in 2019, we know that his delusional character, his charlatanism, his hate language, his fundamentalism, his Arab modernity, his pathological lies, all of this, they could have easily, they were floating on the surface. They could have easily found out. So to me, these two things, because it is stand out when I always see the face of Abiy, or Abiy talking in a number of occasions. But the one thing that I'm afraid about the war going on right now in Ethiopia is, even though, as I mentioned before, the TDF has pulled off another miracle on the Gashena front. there is no dispute that the war is going on at many fronts. To me, the one thing that worries me about this is somehow this also seems to be Eritrea's plan. uh, that the longer the war takes, the weaker Tigray gets. That's its plan. It doesn't give Sha'biya doesn't give a damn about Amhara Khalil or Ethiopia. It doesn't give a damn if Ethiopia implodes. What it is worried is about Tigray, So even though we understand the tactic of the generals in Tigray, their withdrawal and all of that, but it seems to me the one thing that keeps worrying me is that this war of attrition that's going on right now. Even as Tigray wins, the war of attrition will take its toll. And that's exactly, Eritrea wants to intervene only to extend it, only to extend the war. It will intervene at the exact time where it wants to extend the war. That's all that it is trying to do. Right? Its strategy is based on that one. So I'm hoping that somehow there will be a solution for this one. I think that sums it up.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yosef. Professor Eskel, your final word.
I guess we're talking about Abiy's war and peace narratives. These are categories that you apply to other leaders who can calculate, who can be as dictators, as despotic as Abiy is, but they're very different from him. They're tyrants, they're despots, but they're not paranoid. They're not pathological liars. They're not schizophrenic. Abiy is not a normal human being. What Joseph just said reminds me of Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, when she saw Eichmann in Jerusalem, she grappled with who this man was, what he stood for, how such an ordinary human being, rather bland bureaucrat, who was not perverted or sadistic. It doesn't seem that way, but he was normal. He was terrifyingly normal, is the word that she used. He acted as a bureaucrat. He did a job. So they're normal. In fact, dictators that are even paranoid one appear to be genial. The language that he uses, the language that hides who he is probably what makes his followers today and the Ethiopian people believe what he's saying. Maybe experts could grapple with that. But the point that I just wanted to make with regard to his personality, that as long as Ethiopia is under him, a person that could use language and suppress others, the other voices, could cause a lot of damage. What we saw in Ethiopia, what we studied in history, possible genocides under Menelik II in the southern parts of Ethiopia, those were historical narratives. Those were narratives. After he came to power, we saw his capacity to mobilize people for doing evil. He's socializing them into evil doing. His capacity to socialize military generals, political operatives, political leaders, bureaucrats into evil doing is tremendous. And for this, he doesn't have to be a calculating person. He doesn't have to be a normal person, a rational person. He just has to preserve power, focus on preserving power. And to do that, like I just said, since we talked about Abiy today. To keep power, to gain and to keep power, he will do anything. Anything. Ethiopia has lost credibility on the world stage. The economy is in the doldrums. The institutions are moribund. It just doesn't matter. He keeps on going. What matters to him is only one thing: the paraphernalia of power, the comfort of power, the capacity to use brute force to keep power. This is what guides him. Nothing else matters. Not the constitution, not the institutions that were created over a period of time in Ethiopia, not human beings, not Ethiopians, not political parties, not politics, not law, not nothing. The only thing that drives him is the pursuit of power, brute power. That's who he is. He defies analysis. You can't analyze Abiy because he is what Abiy was, Joseph was saying, a pathological liar, a narcissist, and a schizophrenic. Only thing that you can use as a category is what moves him, the way he thinks, is the pursuit of power. That's the only thing that you can use to try to explain him. His narratives of war, his narrative of peace, it's all about power.
Okay, thank you so much. That concludes our today's show on the H panel, and hope to see you next week. And we will cover what would come as an important topic for next week. For today, thank you for your time. Have a good night. You have been following H panel weekly at UMD Media. We covered Abiy Ahmed's peace and war narrative with Yusuf Gabrahewot from California and Professor Ezekiel Gabisa from Michigan. Those who have been following us live on Facebook and YouTube, thank you for following us. Please share, subscribe, like, so that many others can join us as the subscribers and we reach to more people. The panel signs off today. Your host was Getachew Asafa. Bye for now.